Hello everyone. If you remember, the last lesson that we did together in class was lesson 3 on pages 244 and 245 in our Kaplan book. And that lesson was about fraction basics. So today I'd like to continue on with the lesson or with the unit, and we're going to look at lesson 4, fraction operations. Okay, and the first two operations that we see are addition and subtraction. Whenever we add or subtract, we need to make sure that we have the same denominator, So it says you can add or subtract like fractions. Like fractions have a common denominator. In other words, their denominators are the same. That's the only way we can add or subtract fractions. If the denominators, remember the denominator is the number at the bottom of the fraction. So the denominators must be the same in the fractions to add or subtract them. Okay, so we have an example here. Add 3/10 plus 5/10. And I'm reading the denominator with a suffix THS added to it. Number 1, since the denominators are the same, we just have to add the numerators. Again, 3/10 plus 5/10, because the denominators are the same, we can do this operation. Adding 3 plus 5, which gives us 8, is our new numerator, and the denominator is actually going to stay the same. We do not add the denominators together. And then step 2 says to reduce the answer to lowest terms. Reduce the answer means we are going to divide. Okay? It's kind of like saying we're going from big to small. So 8/10 is not in simplest form. We can make it a smaller fraction. How? By dividing by the greatest common factor. The greatest common factor that 8 and 10 share is 2. So we divide 8 by 2, we get a new numerator of 4, and 10 divided by 2 gives us a denominator of 5. Now I cannot reduce 4/5 anymore. So this is in simplest form. Okay? The reason you want to divide by the greatest common factor is because it's the quickest way to get the simplest answer, the simplest fraction, or most reduced fraction. All right, we have another example here, and this time it's subtraction. So 2/9 from 7/9. Subtract the numerators. Again, we're subtracting the numerators only. The answer is already in lowest terms. In this case, 7 minus 2 equals 5. And again, just like with addition, the denominator will not change. And if we look at 5/9, they don't share a common factor, okay? So this fraction cannot be simplified or reduced anymore, okay? If the denominators are not the same, raise one or both fractions to higher terms so that they become like fractions. So before we saw the term reduce, and we know that that means to divide. Okay? When we see raise, we need to think multiply. We're making it bigger. So in example 3, we're adding 5/6 plus 1/4. Okay. One way to find a common denominator is to think of the multiples of both denominators. The lowest is 12. So here we have multiples of 6 and multiples of 4. Multiples of 6 include 6, 12, 18. And multiples of 4, again, are 4, 8, 12, and 16. And of course, there are more. But the lowest one that they share is 12. So that's what we're going to use. Raise each fraction to higher terms with a denominator of 12. So again, remember, to add or subtract fractions, we have to have the same denominator, and here they're different. And that's why we have to look for the multiples that they share. So 5/6, we know we have to multiply 6 times 2 in order to get that 12. And if we multiply 6 times 2, we also have to multiply the 5 by 2. Whatever we do to the denominator, we have to do to the numerator here. So 5 times 2 is 10. Our new fraction for 5/6, when we raised it, is now 10/12. And then back to 1/4. So we would multiply 4 times 3 in order to get a denominator of 12. And because we multiplied the denominator by 3, we have to multiply the numerator by 3. And 1 times 3 is 3. Now, the fractions, now that we raised them, they have the same denominators. So we're able to do the operation. We can add the like fractions, and we're going to rewrite the sum, remember that's an answer to an addition problem, as a mixed number. When we think of mixed numbers, we should always remember a whole number, kind of like this, and a fraction. That's a mixed number. Excuse me. So we have our first fraction, 10/12 plus 3/12 equals, again, we're just adding the numerators, so 10 plus 3 is 13, and the denominator doesn't change, so 13/12. But again, this is called an improper fraction, if you remember from our last lesson, because the numerator is actually greater than the denominator. We call that an improper fraction. So the way we can fix this improper fraction is by turning it into a mixed number. And again, this is by division. 12 can divide into 13 one time, with 1 remaining. So the one time that 12 goes into 13, that's the whole number now for the mixed number. And the 1 remaining, the remainder that we had, became the numerator. And again, the denominator did not change. Use the same process to add or subtract mixed numbers. Example 4 shows how to regroup when subtracting mixed numbers. So for example, if you had to subtract 4 1/16 minus 1 3/8, the first step you'd have to do is raise the second fraction so that it also has a denominator of 16. Remember, we want to think, are the denominators the same? And here they're not. How can we make them the same? By multiplying this fraction by 2. Again, if I multiply 8 by 2, now I can get a denominator of 16, and that would be just like the denominator in the first fraction. Now they're the same. Okay, and whatever I did to the denominator, I have to do in the numerator. So 3 times 2 is 6. So now, if I rewrite this, really I'm subtracting 4 1/16 minus 1 6/16. Okay? If I look at this, I'm going to say, okay, I can't take 6 away from 1. So we're going to do what we would do in a normal subtraction problem when we have to borrow. So we're going to have to borrow from the whole number. 4 became 3, or becomes 3. And we actually have to add 1 to this fraction. By adding 1, remember 1, I'm going to add 16/16, which would equal 1. The reason I put it this way is because I still want that denominator of 16. So instead of just writing 1, I wrote 16 over 16, which equals 1. Now I'm going to add this to the fraction 1 over 16. Now I'm going to have 1 plus 16, which equals 17, over, yep, you guessed it, the same denominator. So now I have 3 and 17 over 16. That's my new fraction, my new mixed number at the top. Minus 1 and 6 over 16. So now I can do this. I can take away 6 from 17. And if I do that, I get a numerator of 11. 16 again does not change. And now I can't forget about the whole numbers. So 3 minus 1 is 2. And that's your answer. Okay? And this is what they're talking about when they say regroup. Okay? It's the borrowing part. Okay? If you have any questions about it, there are helpful videos also available on YouTube. Or again, you can reach out to me and I will try to go over it again with you. Reach out to me on Remind. Don't hesitate to do that, please. And I will explain it again and we'll go over some more examples. Okay, and to check our work, the answer here is 2 and 11 over 16. Okay, remember to always go over the key ideas. These are highlights of the lesson, the key points of the lesson, and they're very helpful. You can add or subtract fractions, but they must have the same denominator. Okay, we should underline that. They must have the same denominator when we add or subtract fractions. If denominators are not the same, we have to find a common denominator and raise one or both fractions so that we can get them to be the same. Always reduce answers to lowest terms and change improper fractions, remember where the numerator is greater than the denominator, to mixed numbers where we have a whole number and a fraction. Okay? Remember, we don't really like to see the improper fraction. If we can fix it, or if it's in the directions, we have to make sure that we turn an improper fraction into a mixed number. Okay? On the next page, page 247, you have questions 1 through 29. Please ignore what is circled. Those were in my book from the person who used it before me. But you have questions 1 through 29 that I would like for you to try. And remember to please show your work. So I'd like to see how you turned an improper fraction into a mixed number, for example. I'd also like to see how you raised your fractions, how you multiplied. Send me a picture of your answers and your work on Remind, and I will give you credit for this page. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you guys, and I'll be seeing you in another video soon.